Hey everyone, Cody Menz here. I have a video about the upcoming Tier 8 Premium American Medium Tank, the M47 Improved. Um, this tank is likely to be one of the holiday ops tanks for 2022 going into 2023 here. And there might even be a special, so like 2D or 3D style coming alongside of it. In any sense, this video going over a little bit about the tank. Is it worth getting? How to basically shoot it and kill it too. And basically what's so special about this tank. Now, this is definitely going to garner, I guess, quite a bit of interest, and a lot of people are probably going to compare it to the Super Pershing, since it's a M47 Patton that has additional armor plates basically slapped over it. Looking at Wargaming's little write-up here, it's about the M47 Patton, and this is basically, it's essentially enhanced armor and additional metal screens and a turret and a hull and a 105mm gun to increase the firepower on it too. So yeah, it's basically a upgraded M47 Patton in a sense, and statistically, is it great? This continues a trend that personally I'm not too much of a fan of. So they're throwing a M47 Improved Patton at tier 8, whereas this tank, it looks like it honestly could be a tier 10 tank, and you're getting more modern, which each tank they basically introduce, and now this is a tier 8 premium that most likely a lot of people are going to be getting. So statistically, we'll have to kind of look to see what did Wargaming do to this to make it fit at tier 8. So unlike the Super Pershing, this does have full matchmaking, so you do see up to tier 10. However, for more of these modern tanks, they're shoving them in basically to tier 8 and gimping them in one way or another to kind of make them work within the game's, confines. In any sense, though, it's got 4 crew members: commander, gunner, driver, loader. We'll get a little bit more into the armor, though. Like we'll take a look at tanks.gg, and there's a link to tanks.gg in the description here if you want to pop over and look at the armor model there. But essentially, you've got a pretty strong mantlet on this, and then you have 65mm on the shielding, the extra turret armor, and then eventually the turret, actually you can't damage it here. This is basically just nothing's behind it. But this thing's pretty freaking good when it comes to the armor. Now this is just going to give you a little sense of it. It does have a pretty big cupola on the top, as you can see, in typical American fashion. It does have that very large, weak cupola. It does have 10 degrees of gun depression, which is nice though. So that helps hide it a bit when you're hold down. And then you have that 65mm of armor on the upper hull, although it does end a little bit right before the tracks, and then it actually covers quite a bit of the lower glacis too here. However, it doesn't cover the very bottom parts of it. Getting into the comparison now, so I threw some different tanks in here. Super Pershing isn't really gonna compare too well just because this does have preferential matchmaking, but you'll be surprised, it actually does have some things better over the M47 Improved. Now these stats are from the 1.9.1 or whatever it is common test server, so they might change before release a little bit, but they shouldn't change too much because this tank's been tweaked a little bit. But in any sense though, I threw the lance in C, so 320 damage for the M47, so that's where these tanks kind of come into play. Indian Panzer, just threw it in there too, but a lot of these, so 10 degrees to gun depression. And then penetration kind of a little all over the place. Like the Renegade's the closest here. However, the M47 has really good penetration, having that 105mm gun. Now you do have a heat round as well. So that's 300mm of pen, a little over 1,000 on the velocity, so not too far off from the standard round. Now, getting into the bad about this tank though, so penetration good, damage, not too shabby. 320 is pretty good for a tier 8 medium. However, your aiming time's a bit long. Maybe they're figuring like, oh well, with all this extra armor, the gun isn't very accurate, even though this is a really modern tank. This is where they kind of balance it unless this changes. So 0.42 accuracy is pretty bad. This thing is not going to be very accurate. whatsoever. Like, this is Russian tank level, heavy tank level bad. So you're going to need to basically either throw certain equipment on, food, stuff like that to kind of mitigate that. Your DPM is also pretty bad here. So you're basically a little over 1700 on the DPM, which is less than the Super Pershing. Lance and C, pretty much down the line. Pretty bad DPM, pretty bad accuracy. You do have the gun depression, penetration, and your damage is okay though. So you're going to be able to damage things with this if you're not too far away, but you're going to be leaning on your armor to kind of survive, because you're not going to, outgun somebody in a fight, head on when it comes to DPM. Your hit points are very low, so you're on par with the Indian Panzer. You have 200 less hit points, unless this changes, than the Super Pershing, less than the Lance and C by a little bit, and obviously less than heavy tanks. So for, say, something like the Super Pershing that's kind of been buffed throughout the years, being a heavily armored medium tank, and this kind of following in that suit, this tank has quite a bit less HP than the Super Pershing, which is kind of in line with heavy tanks. Armor, we'll get a little bit more into that. However, the armor on this thing is actually pretty darn good. Like, that is a plus. It's much better than the Super Pershings. Engine power here is pretty good. Specific power, not too bad. The soft stats on this tank too, like the on-the-move accuracy and the terrain resistance, doesn't seem too bad too. Nothing that's going to cripple the tank in either of those. Top speed, not bad. It's basically Super Pershing, just a little slower, going in reverse. However, that specific power helps out. Traverse is right in line with that. And then, nothing crazy with the view range. It's just kind of in line with other tanks at tier 8, and your camo's nothing special. Now, is this tank, it's going to be, I guess, it looks cool. Who knows about the style? There might be a style coming along with holiday ops with it. If this tank gets introduced with it, it seems like there's a pretty good chance. But let's take a look at the armor a little bit more in depth, because that's the main bread and butter, basically, with this tank. So this is going to be against the Scorpion, tier 8 German TD, and then I also have one with the TS5, both shooting premium rounds. So APCR for the Scorpion, heat with the TS5. Now, this does look green, but as you'll see here, it's actually got pretty good armor. If you're trying to shoot the front of the turret, the thing, this is just level ground, so you're not going to be able to pen that very well unless you're hitting, right above the mantlet, and then obviously the cupola. Now, getting down to the bits underneath, there are chances to pen it here, and then you have a pretty good chance at the upper glacis when it comes to just being on level ground, and the very small slivers that this doesn't cover, you can also pen. Otherwise, this is a bit better than the Super Pershing, and it's pretty decent, for a medium tank on level ground, when it comes to standing up to, what is it here? So a 311 millimeter penetration APCR round. Now, hold down, I didn't use 100% of the gun depression here. I never like to go like 100%, but you're going to see it's pretty good. Now, if your lower glacis sticks out, people are going to be able to pen you. But the upper glacis is pretty much going to bounce things. There's that small sliver if people shoot right underneath where the shielding is. But otherwise, it's going to be really hard unless they hit that, really small piece of the cupola that sticks out. So that's not going to be very reliable. So this thing is actually really heavily armored. Hold down, okay on level ground, against something like the Scorpion shooting premium, which pretty much every Scorpion does. Now, moving on to the TS5, so this is shooting heat. Space armor helps quite a bit, so that soaks up a little bit of the effectiveness of a heat round. However, as you can see here, there's still like little bits where you might be able to squeak in a penetration, but not many. Just like the Scorpion, you have the cupola shot basically. Not too surprising there. And where the shielding isn't, basically, you're going to be able to pen on level ground. Now, that's something to where, like, looking here, there's a 23% chance on the upper glacis. whereas the Scorpion, it's a 64% chance. So this does hold up pretty well against the heat rounds being fired at you. Hull down, so similar. You still have the cupola, but basically when it comes to the turret shot, they're going to have to hit you in this area. And then when it comes to the upper glacis, they don't really have a chance unless they're able to hit the lower part, or if they hit the very small sliver that isn't covered. Otherwise, though, this tank doesn't really have, much armor on the side. It is an M47 Patton. Same thing with the rear, where you're not really going to see anything crazy when it comes to being able to like side scrape, stuff like that. The main thing going with you is, there's nothing like sticking out into the tracks with your hull. It's just that straight side, so you might be able to get lucky, especially with a little bit of extra space armor on the side, but it's still a medium tank. So at the end of the day, is this tank worth getting excited about? It's got the cool factor. It looks really nice. It's a pretty modern tank for World of Tanks terms, but it's definitely them giving it 1300 HP, giving it low DPM, bad accuracy. Those three things keep it from being, I guess, really good. This is going to be your hold down tank. It's going to be a solid performer, but the accuracy and DPM especially is going to hurt it quite a bit. HP a little bit less so, just because the armor is pretty darn good. But it comes, that question comes up again, like, Wargaming, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot here, introducing these tanks, like more modern tanks, and like throwing them at tier 8, tier 7, tier 9, and like, these tanks really are beyond what the game should have, in the current tier 1 to 10 format. So it's something to where this is definitely going to be a pretty good tank. It's worth getting, especially if there's like extra stuff coming along with it. But in all honesty, though, like, this is really a tank where, Wargaming, they could have threw this as a tier 10, medium tank, and nobody would kind of bat an eye. Even a tier 9, medium, something like that. And it's a question, that I feel like they really need to look at in the long term. But as far as this tank itself and focusing just on this tank performance-wise and everything, it's going to be a pretty solid tank, and people should like it. But yeah, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and whether you're excited or not for this tank, at least you kind of know a little bit about what makes it tick. And yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you around in another video. Have a good one.